Shikanoin Heizou is Genshin's newest 4-star character, and as cool as he looked from the early previews, not gonna lie, I was pretty worried. Like, when I heard that he was a 4-star on-field DPS that used a catalyst, I thought it was doomed because historically these qualities have not panned out particularly well for past characters. But Heizou has been released, and I am pleasantly surprised by the measures Hoyoverse has taken to give him a well-designed kit. That is to say, he has a niche in the game that differs from that of other characters, he succeeds in fulfilling that niche, and all while being fun to use. In this gameplay design analysis series, I tend to be more critical of how characters are designed, but it's also important to look at what is done right because that's what we want to see more of. Let's investigate why Heizou's kit works. Before we get into the abilities, we should first get in depth into Heizou's normal attacks, since as an on-field DPS, that's a core part of his game plan. As you know, Heizou is quite literally built different from other Catalyst users, but maybe in a few more ways than you may initially think. Up to now, there had been a few consistent properties across all Catalyst users. First and most obvious is that they always do elemental damage on their normal attacks rather than physical, allowing them to create reactions without relying on their abilities. Second is that they are ranged and have slower attack speed, either shooting projectiles or hitting enemies with instant tracking attacks. This also influences their poise, and you don't need to fully understand this data, but basically ranged characters are staggered by enemies more easily. Third, normal attack combos do not have multi-hits. I'm excluding Ningguang since she doesn't really have a combo. And fourth, the charge attacks on Catalyst users skip the first normal attack and cost twice as much stamina in exchange for generally more damage. So since Heizou was made to be a melee character, Property 1 was the only one that carried over to his kit, and he plays very much like any other melee character. Now what this essentially means is that he takes the best of both worlds from melee gameplay and Catalyst gameplay because the properties that Heizou lack are the ones that I feel most contribute to Catalyst being annoying to play. Obviously I'm only referring to on-field combat since that's the primary thing that weapon type affects. I think that in the beginning of the game though, the developers did have the right intention. Since Catalyst characters could utilize reactions independent of cooldowns and energy restrictions, and given how strong reactions are in this game, not giving them some kind of downsides somewhere else would make them just better than other weapons. While that is sound on paper, it might not have been understood at the time just how much these properties would negatively affect them. When it comes to how Catalyst characters output damage compared to others, they struggle with being able to hit multiple enemies, they get staggered easier and can't stagger enemies as easily, more costly charge attacks translate to less stamina for dodging, and having range doesn't feel very beneficial when enemies will still force you to dodge anyway. With a ranged character, you would think you could deal with enemies easier, but not having a reliable way to keep them off you makes it so the opposite is true, and you just feel extra vulnerable. And due to their slow attack speed, getting interrupted feels extra punishing. Because there are a ton of non-Catalyst DPS characters that have extended periods of elemental damage, the one strength that Catalysts have loses its novelty while still having all of the downsides. It all just ends up making you feel like you have to put in more work to get the same results that other characters would achieve. So yeah, Heizou feeling fast and fluid like other melee characters is a good starting point, but it's the way his kit is built around this fact that really makes it feel like it all ties together. As with most 4-stars, his abilities are relatively straightforward. His elemental skill does damage based on how many stacks Heizou has, up to 4. He can hold the skill to slowly charge up, but his first ascension passive allows him to stack through swirling, which is much more efficient. His burst sucks enemies in and does damage, and if they are affected by Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro, it will also hit enemies with a second instance of that element. As a straight up DPS, there was no way Heizou was going to be able to compete with the game's existing top tiers, and so they leaned more towards Heizou's capabilities as a support. Heizou's 4th Ascension passive adds the final touch by giving the rest of the team 80 bonus elemental mastery for 10 seconds after hitting his elemental skill, buffing their reaction damage. It creates an interesting dynamic where Heizou needs his teammates to be able to swirl, unlocking more of his own damage, but he also gives back to the team through Viridescent Venerer resistance shred and the extra elemental mastery. Everything about Heizou's design is cohesive, because given the identity of an on-field driver that facilitates his teammates' damage, he provides everything you could ask for. He deals good damage to make proper use of his on-field time, he uses standard normal attacks which allows you to pair him with characters like Xingqiu and Beidou, he buffs team damage through the bonus elemental mastery, He can group up small clumps of enemies, he can reduce elemental resistance, he can proc his own reactions constantly without interfering with his team's, and he is less strict on setups since he can switch out at any time with no downsides. Yeah, he isn't the most proficient character in the game at DPSing, he doesn't provide as strong of a buff to his teammates as other characters can, and his crowd control is weak relative to other Anemo users. But the fact that he is capable of doing all these things at a decent level is what makes his spot worthy among a roster of 50 other characters. Him being a melee catalyst character was integral to achieving this too. Because he gets stacks through swirling and it's a reaction that doesn't scale off an attack, his main objective is to get a high quantity of reactions rather than high quality reactions. Using a catalyst enables this since he doesn't have to rely on energy or cooldowns, and being melee further pushes it because of his faster attack speed and access to faster, cheaper charge attacks. When I say for character kit designs that being different should come with relevant purpose, this is what I mean. Like sure, Heizou being a melee catalyst would still have been seen as novel no matter what since he's the first of his kind, but his gameplay actually synergizing and taking full advantage of his unique properties is what's going to keep me wanting to play him. I'm really glad they decided to have Heizou debut this new subset of weapon type, not just because of him, but also because of what it signifies on a grander scale within Hoyoverse's design philosophies. There were already hints of this within other characters, but this further assures me that they are not afraid to break pre-established conventions for the sake of making more interesting characters. Building a diverse roster is difficult, and as much as we all like to crap on certain characters that miss the mark, I am very guilty of this, it is in all honesty very impressive that a majority of the characters in this game carve out their own niche and feel like they have their own place. I think this speaks volumes to the depth of Genshin's combat mechanics and Hoyoverse's creativity in being able to continually capitalize on that. One of the pitfalls I've noticed a lot in various other games is the way they approach universal mechanics, things that remain consistent, like how in Genshin there's an element, weapon type, and set of talents for characters, and how the respective weapon types fall into melee and ranged. The main pros of having these is that players can more easily pick up and play new characters because they will already have a basic understanding of how they work, and it's generally more likely to make a balanced roster. Though, besides the obvious downside of characters with overlap feeling similar to one another, heavily relying on universal mechanics makes creating new characters much tougher. When you try and do something completely different to make a newcomer interesting, that part of them that makes them stand out has a high likelihood of being either underpowered because suddenly they lack something everyone else has access to, or overpowered because it's a strength completely unique to them. Genshin, however, I feel has done exceptionally well in dealing with this potential issue. Within the confines of Genshin's universal mechanics, characters are completely different from one another. Like yeah, every character has an elemental skill, but they all have different properties, different conditions, and even different ways of activating them. This makes it so that when characters do break convention in some way, they still feel like a Genshin character. And because characters have so many individual parts that make up their kits, tuning back other aspects in compensation doesn't leave them feeling like an incomplete character. So because of this, I am pretty confident in the future of Genshin characters. I'm not saying that I think every new release will be as amazing or unique as Heizou, but I don't agree with the idea that Genshin will soon run out of new creative mechanics to implement, or that at some point all new characters will start becoming very similar to old ones. So given that Genshin has many more years ahead of it, I for one am looking forward to what's to come just as much as I always have. I hope you found this video to be interesting or insightful, and as always, thank you for watching.